What is going on, everybody? My name is Rob. I get to be the student pastor here at Aloma. It's amazing. I think I said it in one of the previous vlogs that I've done, but it's fun to say, so I'll always say it. But today I want to talk to you guys about the lessons that we teach our kids, and specifically the lessons that we're teaching our kids when we're not actually being intentional, when we're not saying, "Hey, come here, I want to show you something." It's those lessons that they're getting from us from watching us, watching our examples. So it's more the things that they are catching as to oppose the things that we're teaching. Because for me, the best knowledge is more caught than taught. If you're trying to share your faith with your kids, if you're trying to get them to love Jesus, it's always better caught than taught. And there's just something about experiencing it in your own regards. And so I was thinking about the lessons that I learned from my dad. The ones that have really impacted me as an adult, that have kind of formed who I am as an adult, and they've formed my work habits, my the way that I process things, how I am in my marriage, and all that stuff that I've learned. And I was thinking about it. It's not the funny little things that he told me. Like it's only cheating if you get caught, and if you're not cheating, you're not trying. He sounds like a really terrible person, but just whatever those lessons that he was always teaching me. Work hard, work with everything that you have, like all that stuff. But there's a time in his life where he went through something very difficult, and it was difficult for us as a family. For 5 years as I was growing up, he didn't have a job, and so during that time, he totally felt emasculated. Like he wasn't providing for his family. My dad's the kind of guy who views his self-worth as how can like how good of a job am I doing in providing for my family? And so his self-worth is tied to his job a lot of the times. And so for this 5 year period, for me growing up, it was from fifth grade until 10th grade, it was really difficult to watch my dad go through this. But in watching that, I learned a ton of stuff. Like the lessons that I learned watching him have stuck with me my entire life. But just a little bit about my dad. Great dude, really good guy. Still praying that Jesus is gonna get a hold of him someday. So if you're out there and you're praying, his name's Frank. Pray that God would touch his heart. But he's really smart. Probably the smartest guy you'll ever meet. And if you don't believe me, just ask him and he'll tell you that. But he's really smart. He went to Annapolis, which is the Naval Academy, and he swam for them. He's a really talented, gifted swimmer. He held the national record for the fastest backstroke time in the nation for 2 or 3 weeks. And then this dude, Mike Spitz, whatever his name was, Spitz, I just know that, who shattered all those Olympic records, came along and like dusted my dad. So my dad's very used to success. He's very driven. He has had a lot of schooling. And so for him, life was really easy. Before my fifth grade year hit, life was easy for him. He owned his own business. Money was going really well. My older siblings had a totally different childhood and totally different way of growing up than we did. We had a huge, massive house. It was like 32 or 3,300 square feet, 3 stories, just really nice. And then fifth grade hit, and what happened was my dad owned a sunflower seed plant, and there was droughts in North Dakota, and so like he wasn't able to sell anything because nothing was growing, and so he ended up closing down the plant. And my dad thought he was going to get a job like that, like he's like, who wouldn't hire me? But it turned out it was just a really bad time. The economy was down, and so my dad struggled to find employment. And so he struggled for 2.5 years, and then he found employment, kind of doing some pultrusion stuff for a window company, Marvin Windows. But his boss was pressuring a woman and not treating her well, and my dad stood up for her. And when he did that, he ended up getting fired, because he went against the boss. And then he was without a job again for 2.5 years, until we moved to Virginia, and he actually ended up finding one. But during that 5 year span of where he wasn't working, I learned so much from him. And my dad is always very remorseful, and he's very like, I wish you could have grown up like your brother and your sister. But I tell him all the time, like, I cherish how I grew up. Like it made me who I was. I wouldn't have grown up any different because it taught me things. And so I just want to talk about some of the lessons that it did teach me. Um, Being honest, even if it's uncomfortable. That was the very first lesson my dad taught me. And I got it the second time he lost his job. The first time it was just like we kind of all knew it, you know. Like I'm in fifth grade, my dad's hanging out for a week at home, and like he's depressed a little bit because he's closing up his shop. But the second time, I thought he was just on vacation. And so my dad came up to me and he's like, "Hey, you know I've been at home a lot lately." And I'm like, "Yeah, Dad, I don't want to have this discussion." He's like, "No, you deserve it." And he said, here's a situation at work, and he kind of went through it, and this is how I responded, and because of that, I'm going to lose my job, and he ended up losing it, but he taught me that honesty and being able to stand up for your morals and everything like that is far more important than just kind of um, saying what your kid wants to hear or trying to protect them from hearing the truth. So I've always taken that with me. For me, honesty is one of the biggest things. Like if we're friends and then I feel like I'm getting lied to, man, I really struggle with that because honesty and being able to be honest in a difficult situation is probably one of my top things, top values that I have. Secondly, kind of ties in with that. Let your morals be your guide and not your wallet, not your bottom line. It would have been really easy for my dad to kind of turn the other way and just let this boss kind of like mistreat women and stuff like that. But my dad couldn't do that, and so he put kind of his morals and his values in front of being comfortable. And so we, especially if you're raising your kids in a Christian way, we have to be able to do that, and we have to be comfortable with that because there's a lot of times where we kind of just it would be so much easier to hide our head and like look the other way. But our morals and our values and our lives as Christians, what God has called us to do, kind of dictate that we go and we kind of meet things head on, and we, that kind of drives our decision making process, and that's very true. I learned that from my dad. I learned that from watching my dad. Something else that I learned is that sometimes hard work isn't enough. My dad's a very, very hardworking guy. Like if he has a job, he's gonna work it. He's not gonna complain if it's 70 hours a week or whatever. Like he's there to work. Like that's what he feels he's been put on this earth to do. But sometimes that's not enough. When my dad was searching for a job, he had all these accolades, he had all this good stuff, but it just wasn't enough. He had the reputation of being a hard worker, but it just wasn't enough. Sometimes you have to rely on like community and being propped up by community. For 5 years, my grandparents played a big role. On my mom's side, they played a big role in making sure that I was able to go to basketball camps, in making sure that there was food on the table, in making sure that the house was being taken care of and paid for. And so hard work is important. 100% it's important. But sometimes we as men, especially, like I'm a guy, so like that's my standpoint. Just we as people, we have to rely on community. And we have to rely on other people. And there's a time and a place for it, right? My dad's a very proud man. And so I'm sure it killed him to take the support from his in-laws. But at the same time, your love and his love and his affection for us meant that he had to kind of rely on community. So the other thing, kind of tied in with that one, is that manhood and your value as a man isn't simply tied to your job. For my dad, I think still for his whole life, like that's what it is. His value is based on, and his manhood is based on being able to provide for the family and stuff like that. He doesn't want to retire because he's like, what would I do? Like sit and drink lemonade? Like I've got to work. Like I have value. I have a purpose that I need to accomplish. But for me, I was able to kind of see that and see that it was sort of a flaw. Like my dad had other values. He brought every other stuff to the table. He spent time with me, teaching me how to play basketball, even though I crushed him in 6th grade, and he never played with me again. But like, he's teaching me these values, playing baseball. He's talking about how to treat other people. He's showing me the importance of hard work and honesty and being first to rise. I remember when I was playing basketball, he said, you know, you're good. You're getting to the point where you're good, but there's someone out there who's working harder than you are. So how hard are you going to work? And so that like motivated me. He had so much more value, but in his eyes, he didn't see it. And so one of the lessons that I learned, it's not necessarily always what we do with our example. Sometimes we do something, you know, as parents that isn't the greatest, but our kids take that lesson and they're like, you know what? And they kind of put it on the inverse. And they're like, okay, so my dad defines his value and his self-worth based off his job and what he brings to the family. But I'm actually going to see that it's more than that. It's me as a whole being. It's me as a whole human. What am I going to bring to the family? And the other thing is I learned is when dealing with adversity, you got to meet it head on. All right. So that means what I learned from my dad is he never hid from the problem. He was out there and he was fighting for it and he was trying to find a job. He was fighting hard for his family, trying to do the best that he could. And adversity, sometimes it can make us kind of pull in, where we just kind of pull in and we kind of turtle up and we just hope that nothing more comes our way. But you got to meet it head on. And if you meet it head on, you come up with an action plan. And so you're relying on the community, you're relying on your spouse, you're relying on your friends, and you're just trying to come up with an action plan. Here's the issue, here's the problem, what am I going to do to solve this? One of the things that I learned from my dad is, with his lack of faith, is that watching my mom go through these struggles, who is a woman of faith, and then watching my dad go through this struggle, who is not, he had a much harder time trying to like figure out what was like, why is this happening? Where my mom was just like, you know what? The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. And right now it's just a season in our life where we're going to struggle for a little bit. But if we're faithful, he's gonna keep going and he's gonna bless us. And whether that's financially or if he's blessing us with something else, that's it. But God's in control, so don't worry about it, right? And that was huge for me because I saw my dad struggle with that so mightily. But another lesson that I learned from my dad is that pride is the enemy. It's good to be proud, like be proud about what you've accomplished, be proud of what you've done. But when you let pride kind of dictate, my dad, very smart, like I said, but sometimes when he was looking for a job, he wouldn't take certain jobs because he's like, that's middle management. I'm more on the executive side, or, you know, all this other stuff. And when he finally did, when we moved to Virginia, and he's like, you know what? I'm not worried about being the man. I'm not worried about being a CEO or anything like that, even though I've owned my own business. He's like, I just want to be able to provide for my family again. He actually went into building houses. He was kind of like a grunt laborer for a little bit. And then his reputation, like people, he was a hard worker. They saw that, but he was smart and they saw that and he could do crazy stuff. He actually has a degree in engineering. And so he was working that way and he kept moving up and up and up. And so finally, the boss looked at what he was doing and they're like, man, you know, you should be a field engineer. We have another company that we work a lot with and they're building bridges. He's like, you should go look at that. And so my dad was like, all right, well, I'll go talk to the guys. And he ended up getting back into the field that he studied in college. It's the one where he's able to make the choices. He sees a problem, he fixes it. Like, that's my dad. He's like a problem solver. And he would never have gotten in that position to be able to use his natural gifts that God gifted him with unless he was putting that pride aside and saying, you know what, whatever I need to do to provide for my family now, that's what I'm going to do. And so for me, one of the biggest lessons I've learned from my dad is just pride's the enemy, right? Like there's no one cares what I've accomplished on the basketball court. No one cares what I've accomplished in my life so far. It's, you know, don't think more of myself than anything else. Just keep working hard, keep loving people, keep trying to provide the best that I can. And that's the important part. You know, pride and my own inflated ego, that's not important. And it's actually hazardous to relationships. And so the final thing that I learned in watching my dad those 5 years, he struggled with depression. Obviously he's like having sort of an identity crisis because all of a sudden my mom's providing for us and he's not able to. But I learned that you have to find joy in something, even when times are tough. Luckily for me, and maybe not so lucky for me, uh, my basketball career is what brought my dad joy. Like he sort of like lived vicariously through me, and so he would come to my practices. It's like seventh and eighth grade, and my dad's in there, and so like I'm getting coached. My coach is telling me something over here, but then I have my dad over here from the stands who's like talking. I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is one a little bit embarrassing because no one else's parents are here, and now they all know my dad doesn't have a job. But at the same time, like I got to spend so much quality time with my dad, and my dad was able to see how I was like growing and getting better, and that continued from like seventh grade through my sophomore year in high school. Um, but it brought him joy. You know, watching his son be successful, watching his son work hard and accomplish and get accolades and other stuff like that. Man, it was great for him, and that's what kept him up. And so I've always taken that, and I said, you know what? Even in these times in my life, if it's like now where we've been secluded and we're not able to like hang out with our friends and maybe our families are blown apart, or you know maybe it's just maybe you lost your job. Who knows what it is? Even in these times where it's stressful, you gotta find joy because life is more than just kind of what our circumstances are. Life, God has given us life, one, so that we can glorify Him. And if we're always feeling down in the dumps, that's not glorifying God. But two, I feel like God puts these things in our life. He gives us these little times of trouble and stress and everything so that we can grow in our faith. Because when you can't rely on yourself, when that's not an option, then all you can do is rely on God. And that's the best place that you can possibly be. So these are just lessons that I learned from my dad, but I learned them not because he was like talking to me about them. I learned from watching. And so guys, always be aware as you are parenting, just be aware that your kids are always watching. The things that you watch on TV say a lot. The music you listen to says a lot. Your relationship with God should not be private. It should be lived out in front of your kids' eyes. And then the lessons that you're learning from your devotions or from reading the Bible or whatever it is, man, you got to live those out in front of your kids. Bring them along. Take them with that because our faith is more caught than taught. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you've never seen it put into practice, then you don't know how to use it. So I hope that works. I'm praying for you guys. I love you guys. I can't wait till we don't have to do these things as much and we can kind of get together as a whole church again. And I'm really looking forward to getting to know your fifth graders who are moving up into sixth grade. So it's going to be awesome. If you guys need anything, anytime, Travis, Aaron, myself, we are always available. And we will talk to you guys later. Thanks.